When we look back into the deep history of our planet, there was a time when Earth was not divided into the many continents we see today, but instead was united as one giant landmass called Pangea, a supercontinent that existed around 335 million years ago and began breaking apart about 175 million years ago. And this enormous stretch of connected land was surrounded by a massive ocean known as Pangea, giving Earth a very different appearance from the maps and globes we are familiar with today, and scientists believe that Pangea formed through the slow but powerful process of plate tectonics, where huge slabs of the Earth's crust drift and collide over millions of years, slowly merging landmasses together until they formed this single supercontinent. And during the age of Pangea, the climate was extreme and diverse, with vast deserts stretching across the center, while lush forests and swampy regions surrounded the edges, creating environments that supported a wide range of plants and animals, including giant insects, early reptiles, and later, the rise of dinosaurs and the unity of this land also meant that species could migrate freely from one part of the world to another, leading to the spread and evolution of life across what are now distant continents. And as time went on, the forces under Earth's surface caused rifts and cracks to open within Pangea, pulling it apart into separate pieces, and these drifting pieces slowly became the continents we know today: Africa, Asia, Europe, the Americas, Antarctica, and Australia, shaping the modern geography of our world. And the evidence of Pangea's existence can still be seen today in the way coastlines like those of South America and Africa fit together almost perfectly like pieces of a puzzle, as well as in the discovery of identical fossils of plants and animals on continents that are now oceans apart, proving that they were once connected. And understanding the history of Pangea helps us realize how dynamic and ever-changing our planet truly is, that the Earth is not fixed but alive with motion, and it reminds us that the separation of lands and the placement of continents is only temporary in the vast timeline of creation. For scientists predict that millions of years into the future, the continents will again drift and possibly unite into another supercontinent, continuing the endless cycle of movement, connection, and change that has defined Earth's surface since its beginning. This story of Pangea also teaches us how deeply connected everything on Earth truly is, because the mountains we see today, the valleys, and even the positions of the seas and oceans are results of that slow breaking and shifting that began with the splitting of this one supercontinent. And when we look at the Himalayas, for example, or the Andes in South America, they are direct results of continents colliding after drifting apart from Pangea, showing that what appears permanent to us is in reality always changing with time. And it gives perspective that the Earth's surface is like a vast canvas being painted and repainted over millions of years, with each shift of land creating new climates, new ecosystems, and new opportunities for life to grow. And while Pangea might feel like an ancient story too distant to matter, it actually explains why we find natural resources like coal, oil, and minerals in certain places today, because these were formed in environments that existed long before the continents separated, and when the land split and drifted, these resources were carried along with it, shaping human history thousands of years later. And the fossil record also makes more sense through the lens of Pangea, because without it, we would struggle to understand how the same species of plants or animals could have existed on two continents that now lie far across oceans. But once we realize they were neighbors on a single supercontinent, the mystery becomes clear. And beyond the scientific understanding, there is also a deeper reflection in the story of Pangea, because it shows how unity eventually led to separation, how wholeness gave way to fragmentation, and yet how out of that separation came new life, diversity, and change, reminding us that even in the breaking apart of something great, new paths and new possibilities are created. And so the history of Pangea is not just about geology, but also about the grand design of how the world unfolds, how time shapes creation in ways too vast for us to fully grasp. And it invites us to look at the land beneath our feet with awe, because every mountain, every desert, every coastline is carrying the memory of that ancient supercontinent, a reminder that Earth's story is far older and far greater than the moment we live in now. And as we stand here today watching the continent still drifting slowly, just a few centimeters every year, we are actually witnessing a process that has never stopped. The same process that once united the Earth into Pangea and then divided it again, a process that will continue long after us, carrying forward the endless journey of the planet we call home. And when we think about the slow drifting of these continents, it almost feels impossible to imagine that something so massive could ever move. Yet over millions of years, those tiny shifts build up, pushing seas apart, raising mountains, and even creating islands. And this is how places like the Atlantic Ocean came into existence, beginning as a small crack within Pangea that slowly widened into a great ocean dividing Africa from the Americas. And even today, the Atlantic continues to expand as the tectonic plates move away from each other, reminding us that the Earth is not fixed, but always alive with hidden motion. And scientists study these movements not only to understand the past, but also to predict the future. For they believe that in about 200 to 250 million years from now, the continents may again drift together to form a new supercontinent, sometimes called Pangea Proxima, where the lands will once more unite into one vast mass. Though the arrangement may be entirely different from the original, with oceans closing up and new ones forming elsewhere, and this cycle of joining and separating has repeated itself more than once in Earth's history. As evidence shows, there were supercontinents even before Pangea, like Rodinia and Gondwana, meaning that the Earth's story is far older than just one chapter. And every age brings a new design to the surface of the planet. And if we reflect on this, it humbles us because it shows how small a moment human life really is compared to the vast timeline of the Earth. Yet at the same time, it shows how perfectly balanced and ordered creation is, with every shift, every movement, every change serving a role in shaping the world we know. And as we walk upon the continents today, we are walking upon land that once stood beside other lands, now thousands of kilometers away. And we are part of a living history that stretches back hundreds of millions of years. And though we may never witness another supercontinent form in our lifetime, knowing the story of Pangea connects us to that ancient past and gives us a vision of Earth not as separate pieces, but as one, a single home always in motion, guided by a plan far beyond our own. And if we carry this thought further, it becomes clear that Pangea was not just a random event, but part of a repeating rhythm written into the Earth itself, where continents unite, life adapts. Then continents separate, and life adapts again. And through these endless cycles, the diversity of creation only grows richer. For when the land was one, species spread far and wide across connected regions. But when the land broke apart, isolation forced life to evolve in new ways, giving rise to unique creatures and environments, so that the world became filled with astonishing variety. From the great dinosaurs that once ruled to the countless plants and animals that followed, and even the climates themselves were shaped by this process. Because when all land was clustered together, the center of Pangea became hot, dry and desert-like, while the coasts enjoyed wetter, greener environments. And when it split apart, the circulation of oceans and winds changed, bringing new weather systems and new conditions across the globe. And that constant reshaping of climates determined where forests grew, where deserts formed, where ice spread, and where fertile lands emerged, guiding the path of life, and later guiding the path of humans too. For the places where ancient seas once lay became rich in minerals and fuels that people use today. And the mountain ranges that were lifted by colliding plates became barriers that shaped the journeys of civilizations, meaning that even our own history as people cannot be separated from the story of Pangea, because the land beneath our feet and the resources within it are direct results of those ancient movements. And it gives us a sense of connection across time, as though we are part of a much greater journey, one that began long before us and will continue long after. And in realizing this, we can see the Earth as more than just a collection of continents, but as a living, breathing system, designed with purpose, where nothing is truly permanent except the certainty of change, and every mountain, river, desert, and ocean is a chapter in a vast unfolding story that began with one great continent called Pangea and continues to this very moment. And if we stand still and imagine the Earth during the age of Pangea, we can almost picture a world where the sunrise and sunset touched a single landmass stretching endlessly across the horizon, where creatures roamed freely without boundaries of continents, where massive forests stretched across what are now distant lands, and where oceans encircled everything like a great blue crown. And it reminds us that the Earth has always been in motion, always shaping itself, and that the landscapes we call permanent are in truth only temporary forms in a much larger cycle. And this awareness gives us humility, because while we may build cities, nations and borders, the Earth has its own design, far older and far greater than any human division, and the memory of Pangea hidden in the rocks, in the fossils, and even in the shapes of the coastlines shows us that separation is not the end of unity, but part of a cycle that repeats with wisdom. And if one day far into the future the continents come back together into a new supercontinent, life will again change, adapt, and continue its journey, just as it always has. And so the story of Pangea is not only about geology and science, but about perspective, about seeing how vast the timeline of Earth is, how everything moves with purpose, and how even what seems unshakable eventually shifts, reminding us that change is a constant, creation is ongoing, and our world is far more extraordinary than it appears in the brief moment we witness it. And when we reflect even deeper on this story, we see that Pangea was both a beginning and a transition, a stage in the Earth's unfolding, where unity gave way to diversity, where one form of land became many, and through that change, life was spread across the globe, filling every corner with new wonders. And this shows us that what appears as breaking apart can in reality be a form of growth, because without Pangea's separation, we would not have the richness of environments we see today. The distinct continents, each with their unique landscapes, cultures, and histories, all shaped by the drifting of land that started so long ago. And even the great oceans that seem eternal were once absent, only forming when Pangea split, carrying with them the balance of climates and the movement of life. And so the oceans we sail today, the coastlines we walk, the mountains we climb, all carry within them the hidden memory of that one supercontinent. And if we listen carefully to the Earth, we can almost hear its silent story written in stone and soil, a story that speaks of patience, of cycles that take millions of years, of transformations that create beauty through change. And it teaches us that just as the Earth evolves slowly yet with certainty, our own lives too are shaped by unseen forces of time, growth and movement, reminding us that nothing stands still forever, and that even in the midst of change, there is purpose and order guiding everything forward, just as it has guided the Earth since the age of Pangea. And so, the legacy of Pangea continues to live beneath our very feet, hidden in the shapes of continents that still look as though they once fit together, in the fossils that match on distant shores, in the mountain chains that reveal where land once collided, and even in the resources deep in the ground that were formed in its ancient swamps and seas. And when we look at a map today, we can almost trace the outlines back to that single landmass, realizing that what seems divided was once united, and what is scattered was once whole. And this perspective broadens our vision, because the Earth is not just a place of the present moment, but a living book whose chapters stretch back hundreds of millions of years, each page written slowly by time, by movement, and by change. And Pangea is one of those great chapters, a reminder that unity and separation are both part of the natural order, that life thrives not only when things stay together, but also when they spread apart. And even though we may never see another supercontinent with our own eyes, we are still part of the same unfolding story, walking on land that carries the memory of that ancient unity, breathing air shaped by oceans that were born from its breaking, and living within a creation that continues to move with wisdom, order and balance far beyond what we can fully comprehend. And in this way, the story of Pangea is not just a history of rocks and continents, but a timeless reflection of the way our world has been designed to grow, to change, and to renew itself endlessly. And if we let our imagination wander further, we can see that the Earth itself is like a grand traveler, always moving yet always guided, carrying its lands like companions that drift apart and come together over spans of time so vast we can hardly measure them. And Pangea was one of those moments when the traveler stood still for a while, when the continents rested side by side before slowly beginning their long journeys across the surface again. And through that journey, the Earth shaped everything we know, the oceans that separate lands, the climates that nurture life, the mountains that touch the sky, and the valleys that hold rivers. And each detail carries purpose, for nothing in creation is without meaning. And Pangea reminds us of that, because even in its breaking, there was growth, even in its separation there was harmony. And today we live on the results of that event, benefiting from its outcomes in ways we often overlook, whether in the fertile soils that once lay on ancient coasts, in the rich deposits of minerals that formed long ago, or in the very diversity of plants and animals that make the Earth so full of life. And if we pause to think about it, we realize that we too are part of this grand design, not separate from it but connected to it, walking upon land that was once one, drinking from waters that were shaped by ancient seas, and breathing air that has cycled through ages. And this connection to Pangea shows us that we are woven into the same timeless story of creation, a story of patience, of change, and of purpose, reminding us that while the Earth continues to move and reshape itself, we are here for only a moment, yet even that moment is part of the greater plan that has been unfolding since the beginning. And as this plan unfolds, the Earth keeps whispering its history through the landscapes we see every day. For every coastline is a mark of ancient separation. Every fossil is a preserved memory of life that once roamed freely across Pangea. Every mountain ridge is a scar of continents colliding after drifting apart, and every desert and forest holds clues of climates that shifted when the land was rearranged. And by studying these signs, people have pieced together the puzzle of the supercontinent, discovering that the Earth is far older and more complex than it appears at first glance. And what makes this story remarkable is not only its scale but also its precision, because nothing happened without reason. Each movement of the plates, each rise and fall of oceans, each stretch of land shaped the future in ways we still benefit from today. And when we understand this, we see that Pangea was not just a random cluster of land, but a stage carefully placed in the Earth's journey. A stage that prepared the world for what would come after, for the diversity of life, for the spread of civilizations, for the balance of seas and skies. And this perspective fills the heart with wonder, because it reminds us that the world is not a product of chance but of order, not chaos but harmony. And even the breaking of something so vast as Pangea carried within it the seeds of beauty, growth and renewal. And as we walk on this Earth now, on continents that drift slowly beneath our feet, we can remember that the story is not finished. The journey is still going, and one day, in ages beyond our sight, the land may again unite into another supercontinent, continuing the endless rhythm of creation that began long before us and will continue long after. And if we imagine that distant future, millions of years ahead, when the continents once more drift back together into a new supercontinent, it shows us that the Earth is like a living clock, whose hands move so slowly that one human lifetime is hardly a second. Yet in that slow motion lies a perfect rhythm. And this rhythm tells us that change is not something to fear, but something that has always been part of the design. For just as Pangea broke apart and gave rise to the world we know today, the continents of tomorrow will join again and create new patterns, new climates and new life. And though we may not be here to witness it, our place in this story is still meaningful, because we are part of a moment within the greater whole, and our footprints on this land are written on pages that began long ago with the joining of Pangea. And as we reflect on this vastness, we realize how everything on Earth is connected, that the soil beneath us, the air we breathe, the oceans that carry waves across the world, all trace back to a history shared by one great land. And this unity is a reminder that the Earth has always been one creation, shaped and reshaped with wisdom, and that every change, whether of continents or of life, carries a purpose that leads to growth, balance and renewal. So the story of Pangea is not merely the story of land, but of time, patience and design, and in remembering it, we are reminded of our place within something far greater than ourselves. When we continue the journey of Pangea, we must realize that the story is not only about rocks and drifting continents, but about the long memory of Earth itself. For every coastline and mountain today carries within it the quiet echo of that ancient supercontinent. And if we look deeply enough, we can still see its imprint carved into the landscapes around us. And as we stretch our imagination back to those days, hundreds of millions of years ago, we see a world completely unfamiliar, yet strangely connected to our own. A world where the great landmass of Pangea dominated the planet like a colossal shield stretching from pole to pole, where deserts larger than anything we know today scorched its vast interior under relentless sun, while forests and swamps flourished along the coasts, and where creatures unlike any we could imagine walked, crawled, and flew across lands that are now split apart by oceans. And as we imagine this world, we are reminded that Pangea was not an accident, but a stage in Earth's unfolding plan, where the slow drift of continents that began billions of years before finally united the land into one. And this unity allowed life to spread freely, to mix, to adapt, and to thrive across the whole surface. Yet within that very unity lay the seeds of separation. For deep beneath Pangea, the restless heat of the earth pressed and pulled, building invisible tension until cracks began to form. And those cracks grew into rifts, and those rifts opened into seas, and those seas widened into oceans. And before long, the mighty supercontinent began to break apart, fragmenting into pieces that drifted slowly away from one another, like shards of a puzzle. And this breaking, though it seemed like destruction, was in truth part of a larger cycle, a necessary movement that would shape the Earth into the continents we know today. And if we reflect on this process, we see that the Earth is not fixed but alive, moving with patience and power, and that what appears eternal is in fact only temporary in the grand scale of time. For Pangea itself was not the first supercontinent, nor will it be the last, and scientists tell us that before Pangea there were others like Rodinia and Gondwana, great landmasses that rose and fell over billions of years, each leaving its mark upon the Earth. And after Pangea too there will be another, perhaps called Pangea Proxima, that will form when the continents reunite millions of years from now, continuing the cycle of gathering and scattering that defines the planet's history. And so the story of Pangea is also the story of endless motion, of a rhythm written into the Earth where nothing remains still, but everything flows according to a pattern. And when we see this, we begin to realize how small our human lifespans are compared to the slow breath of the Earth. For what seems unchanging to us is in truth always in motion, and our mountains, rivers, and coastlines are just moments in that flow, temporary forms within a timeless design. And yet, even though our lives are brief, we are deeply connected to this story, because the very land we walk upon is shaped by the breaking of Pangea. The very air we breathe is influenced by the climates created when it split, and the very resources we use, coal, oil, gas, metals, were formed in environments that existed during or before its age, preserved and carried by the movement of continents until they lay buried beneath our feet, ready to be discovered. And so without Pangea, our history as people would be entirely different, for the placement of continents determined the rise of civilizations. The flow of rivers guided the growth of societies, the mountains created barriers and borders, and the resources hidden in the earth provided the means for progress. All of it traced back to that one great land that once united the earth. And this connection gives us perspective, for it shows that our story is part of a much older and greater story, one that began long before us and will continue long after. And it reminds us that the earth is not merely a stage upon which life plays out, but an active participant in creation, shaping and reshaping itself with intention. And Pangea stands as a reminder of that design, a reminder that change is not random but purposeful, and even in breaking there is growth. For when Pangea split, the continents became cradles of diversity, each isolated piece nurturing unique species, climates and cultures enriching the world with variety. And so what seemed like separation was, in fact, the beginning of abundance. And if we look at life today, we see the fruits of that change. From the jungles of South America to the deserts of Africa, from the icy lands of Antarctica to the forests of Asia, each landscape holding treasures of life that exist only because of the drifting of land that began when Pangea broke. And so in every tree, every animal, every ecosystem, we see the hidden hand of that ancient supercontinent. For it was the foundation upon which the modern Earth was built. And if we imagine ourselves standing at the edge of Pangea, watching it slowly pull apart, we would realize that we are not watching an ending but a transformation, not a loss but a renewal. And in that vision, we would see reflected the very nature of Earth itself. For this planet is not static but ever living, ever changing, ever renewing, moving through cycles of unity and division, of creation and transformation, and always carrying forward the purpose of growth. And as we stand here today, knowing that the continents still drift beneath our feet at just a few centimeters each year, we are reminded that the same process continues. The same patient movement that once united the world into Pangea and then divided it again is still at work, shaping our future in ways we cannot yet see. And though we may not live to witness the continents join again, we can know with certainty that they will, and that our Earth story is still unfolding, still moving forward according to a design greater than ourselves. And this knowledge fills us with humility, for we see that our lives are like brief sparks upon a timeline so vast that millions of years are but moments. Yet even so, we are part of that story. Walking upon the land, breathing the air, and living within the cycles of Earth, connected in ways we often forget. And the story of Pangea calls us to remember, to look beyond the surface and see the unity beneath, to understand that the continents we call separate are in truth fragments of one, pieces of a whole that once was and will be again. And in that realization we find a lesson, that unity and separation are both part of life, that sometimes wholeness must break so that growth may come, and sometimes what seems like division is in fact the path to renewal. And so the Earth itself teaches us through Pangea that change is not the enemy but the way forward, that patience is rewarded with new forms, and that every ending carries within it the seed of beginning. And as we carry this lesson with us, we begin to see the world differently, no longer as static but as flowing, no longer as divided but as connected, no longer as random but as purposeful. And in this way the story of Pangea becomes not only a history of the Earth, but also a mirror for us, reflecting truths about time, change, unity and growth, truths that stretch beyond geology into the very fabric of existence. And so we continue to tell its story, not just to understand the past, but to remember the greater order of things, an order that has guided the Earth from the beginning and will continue without end, shaping continents, shaping life, and shaping the journey of all creation. And as we stretch the imagination further and walk mentally through the lands of ancient Pangea, we see that the story of this supercontinent was written not only in the rocks, but in the skies, in the winds that carried dust across its deserts, in the rains that nourished its coasts, in the rivers that cut through its vast interior. And every element was part of a balance that sustained the life of its time. And this balance continued to shift as the land itself moved, because when continents come together, the circulation of air and water is altered, and when they separate, new patterns of climate emerge. And this explains why Earth has gone through cycles of ice ages and warm ages, why seas have risen and fallen, why deserts have spread and forests have vanished, all tied to the slow drifting of continents that began with the breaking of Pangea. And it is astonishing to think that what seems so distant and immovable, the land beneath our feet, actually controls the air we breathe and the weather above our heads. But this is the truth of the Earth. Everything is connected. The deep rocks, the shallow soils, the vast oceans, the skies and winds, the plants and animals, and even us, all woven into a single living system. And Pangea was one of the clearest expressions of that unity, for it gathered everything together and showed how the Earth could function as one. And yet its breaking showed another truth, that diversity and separation are also part of growth. Because when the continents pulled apart, the oceans between them became nurseries of life, filling with new species, while the isolated lands developed their own unique ecosystems. And this is why today we find such incredible variety. Because without the drifting of continents, we would not have the unique creatures of Australia, the lush Amazon basin of South America, the great deserts of Africa, the icy expanse of Antarctica, or the vast forests of Asia. And in each of these landscapes lies the memory of Pangea, for they were all once one, and though they are now separated by oceans, they remain connected in history, like branches of a tree that grew from a single trunk. And if we think of the Earth as that tree, we see that the trunk was Pangea, strong and unified, and the branches are the continents spreading outward, each bearing fruit in its own way, yet all connected to the same root deep within the Earth's design. And this vision helps us see that even in separation, there is connection, that even when things move apart, they are never truly alone, but always part of something larger. And so the Earth teaches us through Pangea a lesson that reaches beyond time, that unity and division are not opposites, but companions in a cycle, that change does not erase connection, but reveals it in new forms. And as we hold this thought, we realize that our world today, though divided by seas and borders, is still one planet, still one creation, still bound together by the same forces that once held Pangea as a single mass. And just as the continents continue to move slowly toward a future reunion, perhaps we too are meant to recognize the deeper unity beneath the surface of division, to see that what seems separate is in truth part of one whole. And this is why the story of Pangea is not only fascinating but meaningful, because it gives us both knowledge of the Earth's past and wisdom for our own lives, reminding us that change is constant, that unity takes different forms, and that the journey is always guided by a greater order. And as we continue this reflection, we may ask what the Earth will look like in another 200 million years, when the continents have drifted back into another supercontinent, and scientists give us many models of how it may appear, perhaps with all lands gathered around the North Pole, or stretched across the equator, or clustered into a new shape entirely. And though we cannot know for certain, what we can know is that the cycle will continue, that the land will unite, then break, then unite again. And this rhythm has been repeating for billions of years, long before Pangea and long after. And so our moment is but a page in that eternal book, and this perspective humbles us, reminding us that the Earth is ancient, vast and wise beyond our comprehension, and that our lives, though brief, are lived upon a foundation shaped by millions of years of motion. And that very foundation should fill us with gratitude and awe, for it supports us silently, holding the memory of ages, guiding the climate, shaping the landscapes, sustaining the resources, and giving us all that we need to live. And in return we are called to remember its story, to honor its design, to see in its cycles the reflection of truth, that nothing stands still forever, that even the greatest of structures will change, and that change itself is not destruction, but transformation, a path written into the fabric of creation. And if we hold on to this thought, then the story of Pangea is no longer a distant tale of geology, but a living reminder that everything we see is temporary, yet purposeful, fleeting yet meaningful, changing yet guided. And so with each step upon the land we walk not only upon soil, but upon history, not only upon earth, but upon memory, and not only upon ground, but upon design. A design that has carried this planet from one supercontinent to another, and will continue until the end of time. And as this continuous journey of Earth's shifting face carries on, we see that the breaking of Pangea was not the end of a chapter, but the beginning of countless new ones. Because once the continents drifted apart, the oceans rushed in to fill the spaces left behind, carving out the Atlantic, widening the Indian, and shaping the Pacific into the vast basin it still is today. And this act of separation allowed species once joined to diverge, evolve, and adapt, creating an explosion of diversity that might never have happened if Pangea had remained locked in its massive embrace. For animals that roamed freely across one land now found themselves isolated, pushed by new climates, challenged by new terrains, and through that struggle, life blossomed in countless directions, giving rise to unique forms in every corner of the earth. And in that blossoming, we see how the breaking of unity created a new form of beauty. For when the land stretched itself apart, it was not destruction but transformation, not loss but preparation for greater richness, and humanity too, much later, would inherit the benefits of this design, because the placement of mountains, rivers, plains, and coasts determined where people would build their homes, grow their food, and sail their ships, and the very distribution of resources like metals, oils, and fertile soils all trace back to those ancient continental shifts, showing that what once seemed like a slow tearing of the earth was in fact a deliberate arrangement that set the stage for future civilizations. And if we look closer, we see that even the smallest details of our lives today connect back to that distant time. For the food we eat depends on the soil shaped by drifting continents. The air we breathe depends on the forests that grew in climates made possible by their positions. And the journeys we take across oceans depend on the very spaces created when Pangea dissolved. And this teaches us that nothing is without purpose, that even the drifting of land across millions of years is part of a balance we can hardly grasp. And it fills the heart with humility to realize that we live within a story far older than humanity, a story that began long before us and will continue long after. And as the continents keep moving slowly, almost invisibly beneath our feet, they remind us that change is constant, that no state of the earth is permanent, yet every change carries within it the seed of renewal. So just as Pangea was once the unity of all land and then became the separation of continents, one day far beyond our lifetime, the plates may once again drift together to form a new supercontinent, and that land may look entirely different from Pangea, with new mountains rising, new seas vanishing, and new climates covering its surface. Yet within it, the same purpose will continue. For the Earth's journey is one of endless cycles, of gathering and scattering, of shaping and reshaping, and through it all, we are reminded that the world was never built on chaos, but on a rhythm so vast that only patience can see it. And in this rhythm lies a lesson for us as people, because just as the continents move slowly yet with certainty, our own lives unfold in stages, sometimes joined, sometimes broken, but always moving toward a design larger than we can see. And if we accept that, then the story of Pangea is not just the story of the Earth, but also a reflection of ourselves, of unity, of separation, of struggle, and of renewal, a reminder that everything changes, yet everything has meaning. And when we think about the unimaginable scale of time that shaped Pangea and then scattered it apart, we begin to realize how small our own lifespans are compared to the Earth's memory. For what is a century to a planet that takes millions of years to shift its continents, a few hundred kilometers? And yet within that smallness lies significance, because just as tiny shifts of tectonic plates accumulate into massive transformations, the small choices and actions of people across generations accumulate into the course of civilizations. And this reflection gives us a deeper way to see the world, because the mountains we climb or the valleys we settle are not merely backdrops to our lives, but ancient witnesses that once stood in other lands, shaped by forces beyond imagination. And when we stand by the sea, we are standing on the boundary, created when Pangea's embrace loosened and the oceans poured in. And when we look at animals spread across continents, we are looking at families once united, now separated by distance, but still echoing their common origin, and even the languages we speak. The cultures we build, the trade we carry, all rest upon the geography that came from the breaking of that supercontinent. And so the story of Pangea is not a remote tale of science, but a living truth beneath our feet. A truth that continues with every inch the continents still move today. And if we had eyes to see it, we would realize the ground is not still but alive, sliding on molten foundations, carrying cities, rivers, forests, and people as passengers in a journey that does not stop. And while it moves too slowly for us to notice in our days and years, the Earth keeps reshaping as it always has, and one day the continents will meet again, forming a new face for the world, a face no one alive today will see, but one that carries the same lesson, that change is written into creation itself, that no state is final, and that within every separation is the possibility of reunion. Within every drift is the promise of renewal. And perhaps this is why the story of Pangea fascinates us so deeply, because it speaks not only of the past of the Earth, but of the pattern of existence itself, a pattern of unity, division, and unity again, reminding us that nothing is wasted, nothing is without reason, and all is part of a design far beyond what the eye can see. And as we let this thought settle deeper, the image of Pangea becomes more than just an ancient continent. It becomes a symbol of how the world carries memory within its stones. Because every grain of sand on the shore was once part of a mountain torn apart by shifting land. Every ripple in the sea tells of basins carved when continents drifted away. And every fossil we find is a messenger from a time when creatures walked freely across a single boundless landmass. And these reminders show us that the Earth is layered with history, not random but purposeful, written with patience over spans of time too vast for us to count. And this should inspire awe, because while our lives rise and fall within the blink of an eye compared to the Earth's journey, we are still part of the same design, breathing the same air that has circled since Pangea's days, drinking water that has cycled from ancient seas, and walking upon ground that once carried forests and rivers in lands that are now oceans away. And when we recognize this, we see that the Earth's past is not distant. It is present beneath our feet and above our heads, guiding the seasons, shaping the climates, determining the paths of our lives, and teaching us through its very existence that change is inevitable, that patience is necessary, and that every stage of transformation carries within it the seeds of balance and beauty. For just as the breaking of Pangea seemed like a tearing apart, but gave rise to diversity and abundance, the changes we face in life, whether small or great, often hide within them a future we cannot yet see, a future that may only be understood after the passing of time. And this connection between the Earth's history and our own experience is what makes the story of Pangea not just science but wisdom, for it shows that even the largest shifts, the most dramatic separations, and the longest waits are still part of something purposeful, something designed with harmony at its core. And as we think of the Earth drifting, mountains rising, seas deepening, and skies shifting over millions of years, we're reminded that we too are carried by a current far larger than ourselves. a current that is always moving forward, even when we do not see it. A current that never stops shaping us, just as it never stopped shaping the Earth from the time of Pangea until now. And if we follow that current further, stretching our imagination into the future, just as we stretched it into the past, we can see that the story of the Earth is not finished. For the continents even now continue their silent march across the globe, drifting a few centimeters each year. Yet those centimeters will, given millions of years, create a completely new map, with oceans closing and mountains rising where seas once lay. And scientists predict that one day a new supercontinent may form, whether it gathers near the equator in a belt of heat and storms, or unites near the poles in a land of ice and snow. Its shape will not be Pangea, but something altogether new, perhaps surrounded by one massive ocean, perhaps crowned with mountain ranges higher than anything we know. And that land will hold climates unknown to us, creatures adapted to worlds we cannot imagine. And it may even shape the path of humanity, if humanity is still present, guiding where people settle, what they grow, how they travel, and how they live. And this thought connects us to the deeper rhythm of creation. For the world is never still, never fixed, always moving, always preparing for the next stage. And when we look at the slow movement of continents and the vast ages it takes to transform the Earth, we can find a mirror for our own lives, because though our struggles and journeys seem small, they too are part of something larger. And though change may be slow or difficult, it carries meaning. And just as the breaking of Pangea created the diversity and richness of the world today, our own breaking, our own shifts, may carry hidden blessings and opportunities we cannot yet see. And this realization brings both humility and hope. Humility because we see how vast the story is compared to ourselves, and hope because we know that within the great design nothing is wasted. Every stage, whether of land, sea, or life, has its place and its purpose. And so Pangea becomes not only a chapter of the Earth's past, but a reminder for the present and a sign for the future. That unity, division, and reunion are all part of the same endless journey. And when we reflect more deeply on this endless journey, we begin to see that Pangea's story is not just about rocks and soil drifting across the planet. It is about how everything in existence follows patterns of unity and separation. For once the land was one body, then it split apart. And yet the same forces that separated it are guiding it slowly toward reunion. And within that cycle lies wisdom. For life itself often mirrors this rhythm. Families come together and then scatter across the world. People meet and part. Civilizations rise united and then fragment. Yet the cycle never ends, it keeps moving. And with every stage comes new opportunities, new growth and new forms of beauty. And so when we look at the map of the Earth today, with continents scattered like pieces of a puzzle, we should remember that they are not drifting without direction. They are following a path written long before. A path that ensures balance, that ensures diversity, that ensures renewal. And we can already see how that balance has unfolded. Because without the separation of Pangea, there would not have been such rich climates, such wide ranges of life, such rivers and seas that became highways of human trade and connection. And when the continents join again in the far future, new balances will appear, new climates will dominate, new life will emerge, and humanity, if still present, will adapt once again, showing that the Earth itself is a teacher, reminding us that change is natural, that separation is not always loss, and that renewal always follows transformation. And so the story of Pangea continues, not only in geology and science, but in the lives we live. Because just as the Earth carried its land through cycles of unity and division, so too are we carried through cycles of struggle and growth, always moving forward even when we cannot see the full design. And this is why remembering Pangea is not only fascinating but meaningful, for it shows us that the ground beneath our feet has already traveled a journey far greater than our own, and yet it carries us gently as part of that same endless design. And if we let our imagination trace that design even further, we see how every corner of the Earth still carries the fingerprints of Pangea, for the coastlines of Africa and South America fit together like pieces once joined. The Appalachian Mountains in North America share their roots with ranges in Europe and Africa, showing they were once the same chain before the land tore apart. And the fossils of identical plants and animals lying on continents now separated by oceans remind us that distance is an illusion of time, because once all was one, and this realization makes the world feel smaller, more connected. as though every continent is simply a relative who moved away, but still shares the same family blood. And when we look at maps, instead of seeing division, we can see unity, for the jagged edges of the continents are scars of a single body once whole. And those scars tell a story of endurance, that even separation cannot erase belonging. And perhaps this is why the idea of Pangea resonates so strongly with us, because it reflects a truth we feel deep inside, that everything is linked, that no part exists alone, that even when the earth seems divided, beneath the oceans and across the ages it is still one creation, still one system moving in harmony. And when we think of the future, when the continents will come back together, after millions of years of wandering, it reassures us that unity is not lost forever. It only waits for its appointed time to return. And so the story of Pangea is not only the tale of ancient landmasses, but also a symbol of connection, reminding us that all things, no matter how far they drift, are part of a greater whole that will one day be brought together again. And as we carry this thought forward, it becomes clear that the earth itself is a witness of time, keeping records not in books or scrolls, but in its mountains, oceans, and layers of stone, each one telling a chapter of the story that began when Pangea formed. And even before that, when older supercontinents like Rodinia and Gondwana had their turn, for Pangea was not the first and will not be the last. It was part of a cycle that has repeated over and over since the planet was born, a cycle of continents joining into one massive body and then breaking apart again, a cycle so vast that it stretches across hundreds of millions of years, reminding us that history is not confined to human memory, but written into the very crust of the earth. And when we study these cycles, we find that they are not random but precise, each collision of plates creating mountains that shape climates, each splitting of land forming seas that influence life, and each movement of rock beneath the surface, sending ripples that echo for ages. And we see that without these movements, life would not have flourished as it did. For the nutrients that feed forests and farms come from rocks uplifted and broken by tectonic motion. The rivers that sustain civilizations follow paths carved by continental drift, and the diversity of animals and plants that enrich our world exist because Pangea separated them into distant homes where they evolved uniquely. And so what appears as slow and even violent change is in fact a hidden mercy, because it allowed the world to become abundant, balanced and prepared for us to live in. And when we reflect on this, it humbles us, because we realize that even the strongest mountains we see today were once seabeds or valleys. And even the oceans we sail today were once highlands or deserts. And this shows that nothing remains the same. Everything shifts, but in that shifting there is wisdom, there is renewal, and there is always a purpose that unfolds with time. And as we let this awareness sink deeper, we begin to notice how the very map of the world we know today is only a temporary arrangement. For Europe, Asia, Africa, the Americas, and Australia are not fixed in their places, but slowly moving like silent ships on a hidden ocean of molten rock. And though they seem still to us, in reality they glide steadily, colliding here, pulling apart there, reshaping coastlines and redrawing the boundaries of seas. And in that motion, the Earth reminds us that permanence is an illusion, that what feels unchanging is in fact always in motion. And this truth can free us from the fear of change. For if the continents themselves cannot remain still, why should we expect our own lives to remain unchanged? And if the Earth can break apart its greatest landmass, only to give rise to greater richness, then surely our own separations and struggles too can carry hidden blessings. And when we walk upon the ground, we are walking upon stories millions of years old, stepping across the very stones that once belonged to Pangea, stones that traveled silently as the continents drifted, carrying within them the memory of unity. And it is astonishing to think that the soil beneath a city in South America and the soil beneath a desert in Africa were once side by side, sharing the same rain, the same rivers, the same forests, and now stand oceans apart yet still part of the same earth. And in this way we see that distance is never true separation, for everything remains connected within the larger whole. And just as Pangea's fragments are still part of one planet, so too the parts of life that seem broken are never truly lost. They remain within the same design, waiting for their purpose to appear. And this perspective allows us to see Pangea not just as a relic of the past, but as a living reminder of the deeper truth that unity always underlies division, and renewal always follows change. And if we look even closer, The story of Pangea is written not only in continents and oceans, but also in the skies and climates that have shaped life. For when the land was joined into one vast body, the weather patterns were unlike anything we know today, with dry interiors far from the sea becoming deserts that stretched endlessly, and coastlines experiencing storms that circled without barriers. And when Pangea broke apart, those climates shifted, bringing rains to new regions, creating fertile valleys, and allowing forests to spread, where once there had been only dryness. And so even the air we breathe today carries the legacy of that ancient movement. For the winds that sweep across the globe follow paths determined by the placement of seas and land, and those paths were first drawn when Pangea fractured, and the oceans themselves, filled with currents that regulate the temperature of the world, exist because the continents allowed them to form, carving deep basins where waters could gather and swirl in ceaseless motion, sustaining life across the planet. And when we think of this, we realize how deeply interconnected everything is. For the flight of a bird in the sky, the flow of a river through a valley, and the harvest of crops from the soil are all linked to decisions made by the earth long before humans walked upon it. Decisions that began with the joining and the breaking of Pangea, and this recognition should stir in us both wonder and gratitude, because the balance we depend on today was prepared through ages of transformation, showing us that the world was never random, but always unfolding in harmony. And if the earth itself needed cycles of breaking and renewing to bring forth abundance, then we too can learn to trust the cycles in our own lives. For even when something great seems to shatter, it may be that what comes after is richer, more diverse, and more full of life than what was before. Just as the breaking of Pangea gave us the world we now call home. And when we stand back to see the whole arc of this story, it becomes clear that Pangea was never just a landmass, but a stage in the Earth's long unfolding, a chapter written so that the following chapters could exist. For if the land had stayed as one, the oceans would never have taken their present form. The climates we know would never have emerged. The migrations of life that filled every corner of the planet would never have been possible. And even human history would have been entirely different, because the rise of civilizations depended on the rivers, coasts, and fertile plains that were shaped by the separation of continents. And so the very pattern of our existence today is the fruit of decisions made by the Earth long before, reminding us that every moment is connected to those that came before and those that will come after. And just as Pangea gave way to a world of variety, so too does every ending we face often open to a beginning we cannot yet imagine. And this is why the story of Pangea is more than science. It is a lesson of perspective, showing us that change may feel like breaking, but can in truth be the doorway to growth. And that time, though slow and patient, brings forth design with precision. And in that design, everything finds its place. For even the drifting of continents across millions of years is not wasted, but carefully arranged so that balance, diversity, and abundance may appear. And when we remember this, the earth itself becomes a teacher, whispering through its stones, its seas, and its skies that nothing is without meaning, that all is part of a greater whole, and that the journey, whether of land or of life, always continues toward renewal. And as we let this truth settle within us, we begin to notice how even the smallest details of the present world still echo the unity of Pangea. For the migration paths of birds that cross continents follow ancient routes shaped when the land was one. The genetic similarities between species separated by oceans testify that they once shared the same home, and the minerals deep in the ground reveal through their composition that they were formed in environments now scattered across the globe. And when scientists map the seafloor, they find mountain ranges and ridges that mark the very scars of Pangea's breaking, as if the earth itself carries memories etched into its crust. And these memories remind us that though millions of years pass, nothing is forgotten, all is preserved in some form, waiting to be discovered. And this teaches us that the earth is like a great book, each layer of rock a page, each fossil a word, each continent a chapter. And though the book is vast, every detail belongs to the same story. And when we realize this, we see that we too are part of those pages, our lives written within the same creation that once held Pangea. And this perspective fills the heart with humility and awe, because it shows that we walk not upon a silent ground, but upon a living memory. And every step we take is connected to journeys that began long before us, journeys of land moving, seas rising, skies shifting, and life adapting, all so that the Earth could become the home we know today. And when the continents move again, as they surely will, forming a new supercontinent in the far future, the same truth will remain, that change, however vast, is part of a design that always carries purpose. And in that purpose, nothing is wasted, nothing is meaningless, and all is guiding toward balance and renewal. And if we stretch our vision beyond ourselves and imagine the Earth millions of years from now, we can almost see the continents slowly closing in, the Atlantic Ocean narrowing until it vanishes, mountains rising where seas once stretched wide, new deserts spreading, new forests flourishing, and new coastlines forming where none exist today. And in that future, life will adapt again. New species will emerge, others will fade, and the cycle of creation will continue just as it always has. For the Earth never stands still. It is always in motion, always reshaping, always preparing. And in this eternal movement, there is a lesson written for anyone who reflects, that even what feels permanent is only a stage, that every form is temporary, that nothing remains exactly as it is. And yet within this constant change there is order, a hidden harmony that ensures the balance of life. And just as Pangea once broke to give rise to the world we know, so too will the future hold transformations that seem vast beyond measure, yet carry within them the seeds of renewal. And when we stand in wonder at the thought of continents drifting and colliding over ages, we cannot count. We should also remember that we are part of the same journey, carried on this moving Earth, shaped by its climates, nourished by its soils, sustained by its seas, and taught by its history. And in that awareness we find both humility and strength. Humility, because we see how small we are in the scale of time, and strength because we see that just as the Earth has endured endless cycles of breaking and renewing, so too can we endure our own changes, knowing that every ending carries the beginning of something new, and that the design of the world, from the time of Pangea until now and beyond, has always been written with wisdom. And when we think of that wisdom more deeply, we realize that the story of Pangea is not only about continents and oceans, but also about the very foundation of life itself. Because the breaking of land created new shorelines where tides could rise and fall, and those tidal zones became nurseries for countless species, safe spaces where fragile forms of life learned to grow. And as the continents drifted apart, isolated ecosystems formed, each one a cradle of unique diversity, giving the world its endless variety of plants, animals, and landscapes. And even the great extinctions that followed were not the end but the beginning of renewal. For from each loss came new life, stronger, more adapted, more suited for the world that was forming. And this shows us that the Earth has always been in motion, not only to shift land and sea, but to prepare space for growth, to create opportunity for life to flourish in ways it never could have if all had remained the same. And in this we see a reflection of the truth that change is not destruction but transformation, that endings are not empty but doors to beginnings. And just as the breaking of Pangea led to the rise of continents, climates, and civilizations, the changes in our own lives often carry hidden blessings, shaping us into something new even when we do not yet understand. And so when we remember Pangea, we are not simply remembering a supercontinent of the past, we are remembering a lesson written in stone, that nothing is ever still, that every stage has a purpose, and that the world itself is built on cycles of unity and division, of loss and renewal, of patience and unfolding design. And in that rhythm, both the Earth and our own lives find meaning. And as we move forward in this reflection, we cannot overlook how the legacy of Pangea still lives in the world today. Because the continents may have drifted far apart, separated by vast oceans and climates, yet the shapes of the coastlines whisper the memory of their former unity. South America, curving into the hollow of Africa, India's march northward into Asia, Australia drifting into its own quiet corner, all like scattered pieces of an ancient puzzle that once fit perfectly together. And even beneath the seas, the hidden ridges and mountain chains tell the same tale, that the Earth remembers its oneness, that nothing truly forgets its origin. And in this, we find a profound message for humanity itself, because though we may seem divided by nations, languages, and cultures, there is within us a memory of unity, a reminder that we too once belonged to one beginning. And though time has carried us into different lands and different stories, we remain connected in ways deeper than borders, like tectonic plates that move apart, yet are forever part of the same Earth. And perhaps the reason the story of Pangea resonates so deeply is that it mirrors our own longing to return to connection, to remember that beneath all separation lies a shared origin, and that the great task of our lives may be not to resist change, but to understand the hidden unity that even separation cannot erase. And as scientists continue to study the remnants of that ancient supercontinent, they uncover not just the physical evidence of drifting plates and shifting crust, but also the narrative of life itself, written into the rocks and fossils. For the distribution of certain species across continents that are now oceans apart makes sense only when we remember they once shared the same land. So we find fossils of the same fern-like plants in South America, Africa, India, and Antarctica, and remains of early reptiles that lived and roamed across lands that today lie separated by vast seas. And this gives us a vision of time so deep that it humbles our short human span, because it shows us that the Earth has lived through transformations greater than anything we can imagine. It has shifted its very shape. It has broken itself apart and remade itself. And still life endured, adapted, and flourished, which carries for us the lesson that change, though frightening, is also the doorway to new possibilities. For without the break of Pangea, the diversity of life as we know it may never have emerged. Climates may never have shifted in the ways that forced evolution. Rivers may never have carved the paths they did. Mountains may never have risen where they stand now. And humanity itself may not have appeared in the same way. So when we gaze at the map of the world and trace those jagged coastlines, we are not merely looking at geography. We are looking at echoes of destiny, at the fingerprints of time, at a reminder that even the ground beneath us is never truly still. And yet it all works with a purpose that sustains the story of life. And when we think of that purpose, it becomes clear that the breaking of Pangea was not just a random scattering of land, but part of a grand design woven into the Earth's history, because each fragment of the supercontinent carried with it unique climates, resources and challenges that shaped the species who lived there, pushing them to adapt in different ways. And from that divergence came richness, diversity, and resilience. For when one path closes, another opens. When one climate dries, another becomes fertile. When one species fades, another rises stronger. And in this endless dance of separation and renewal, we see that creation itself is alive, always moving, always unfolding in ways beyond our limited vision. And perhaps this is why contemplating Pangea stirs something profound within us, because it tells us that what may look like a breaking apart is often the very thing that allows new life and new beauty to emerge, reminding us that even in times when everything seems to be falling away, there may be hidden beginnings, unseen futures being prepared, just as the breaking of Pangea set the stage for the world we now call home. And as we follow that unfolding, we see how the continents, drifting ever so slowly yet powerfully across the mantle, carried with them the seeds of new stories. For Africa, rising from the heart of Pangea, became the cradle of so much life, its fertile lands nurturing countless species and eventually giving rise to humankind. While South America, with its lush rainforests and mighty rivers, became home to astonishing biodiversity, and North America, with its vast plains and mountain chains, became a land of contrasts and survival, and Eurasia, stretching across immense distances, fostered the mingling of peoples and cultures in ages far ahead, while Antarctica, drifting southward into ice, became a silent witness to the passage of time, preserving secrets in its frozen depths, and Australia, isolated in its own path, became a sanctuary of unique creatures found nowhere else. So each piece of the shattered whole carried a purpose, and together, though separated, they created a balanced world where climates, ecosystems, and living beings interwove into a single fabric of existence. And when we recognize this, we begin to understand that the Earth itself is a storyteller, that its mountains, rivers, and oceans are like chapters, its fossils like words, its drifting plates like the turning of pages. And in that story, Pangea is not merely the opening scene, but the root memory of our shared world. A reminder that even in separation there is unity, even in distance there is connection, and even in change there is continuity. And if we listen closely to that continuity, we realize that the Earth has always spoken in cycles, because just as Pangea was once whole and then broke apart, so too do geologists believe that one day the continents may drift back together again, slowly over hundreds of millions of years, to form a new supercontinent, sometimes called Pangea Proxima, or other imagined names. And though we may never live to see it, the very idea reminds us that nothing stays fixed forever, that the world is a living, breathing creation, forever moving, forever reshaping itself in ways both subtle and vast. And in this, there is a quiet reassurance that even the greatest separations can one day return to unity, that what is scattered can be gathered again, that what seems lost can be remade. And this vision of Earth's distant future invites us to see our present differently. Because if the continents themselves are not bound to their positions, if mountains rise and erode, if oceans open and close, then how much more flexible can we as human beings be? How much more can we endure the shifts of life, knowing that change is the very nature of existence, and within it lies not destruction, but the constant preparation of new beginnings, just as the story of Pangea shows us. And when we reflect on those new beginnings, it becomes clear that the history of Pangea is not merely about rocks and landmasses, but about the conditions that made life possible in all its astonishing variety. For when the supercontinent split, coastlines multiplied, creating new habitats for marine life. Oceans deepened and widened, giving space for currents to circulate and regulate climate. Mountains rose where plates collided, shaping weather patterns and rivers that nourished valleys. Deserts expanded where moisture could not reach, while rainforests flourished where warmth and rainfall converged. And in each shift, life was challenged yet responded with creativity, adapting, evolving, spreading into niches that had never existed before, until the Earth became filled with a tapestry of environments so diverse that no single land could claim to hold it all. And through this we see that the breaking of unity was not a loss but a transformation, that the oneness of Pangea was not destroyed but expressed in new forms, spread across the globe like scattered seeds that together formed a garden richer than before. And in this garden humanity would one day walk, a late arrival in the grand story, but one capable of looking back and learning from the Earth itself, capable of recognizing that the fractures of the past carried within them the wisdom of balance and renewal, and in that wisdom we discover that even the forces which seemed violent and destructive, the tearing of land, the grinding of plates, the eruption of volcanoes, the trembling of earthquakes, were in truth the very tools through which the Earth was shaped into a home fit for countless creatures. For without the upheaval of mountains, there would be no rivers flowing down to nourish plains. Without the widening of oceans, there would be no currents carrying life and moderating climate. Without the collision of plates, there would be no fertile volcanic soil upon which forests could thrive. And so what appears as chaos from a narrow view reveals itself as harmony from a greater perspective. Just as Pangea's break was not an ending, but a vast unfolding of possibilities. And if we carry this lesson into our own reflections, we see that our lives too are often shaped by pressures and separations that seem harsh in the moment, but later reveal themselves as necessary steps toward growth, reminding us that the Earth's story is also our story, and the memory of one supercontinent lingering in the shapes of the shores is not only geology written in stone, but also a silent teaching about patience, endurance, and trust in the unfolding of time. And as time unfolds, we realize that the very continents we walk upon are not fixed foundations, but travelers in a journey far longer than any human life, drifting slowly across the mantle like ships upon a hidden sea, sometimes colliding to form towering mountains, sometimes parting to open vast oceans, sometimes circling back toward reunion. And though the motion is almost invisible to our daily eyes, it never ceases. It continues with a constancy that humbles our sense of permanence. For even the ground beneath our feet is in motion, and when we contemplate this, we see how small yet how meaningful our place is, because we live upon a planet that is alive with change, carrying us with it through an unfolding story that began long before us and will continue long after. Yet even in that immensity, our awareness allows us to find meaning, to see that the history of Pangea and the slow drifting of land remind us that nothing stands still, that what is together may part, and what is apart may meet again, that the true nature of existence is motion, and that harmony is not found in resisting change, but in understanding its place in the greater whole, just as the continents themselves obey laws deeper than their form, laws that shape the Earth into balance. And when we see that balance, we begin to recognize that the Earth's history is not random, but deeply ordered. For every shift of a continent, every rising mountain, every spreading ocean ridge played a part in creating the conditions for life as it is today. And without those immense and ancient changes, the world would not have the variety of climates, landscapes, and ecosystems that sustain us. So the unity of Pangea was a beginning, but its separation was a necessity. For only through the scattering of lands could the richness of creation be displayed. And as we walk the shores of Africa, or gaze at the Amazon, or climb the Himalayas, or feel the icy winds of Antarctica, we are in truth walking through the pages of a living book written over eons, a book in which the first chapters were carved when all the land was one, and the later chapters were born when that oneness was spread across the globe. And though we cannot turn back those pages with our hands, we can with our minds and hearts. We can remember that the earth we inhabit is one continuous story, and that the marks of Pangea are still here, in the fossils, in the coastlines, in the currents of the oceans, reminding us that separation itself can be part of a greater unity, that breaking apart may serve to reveal a deeper wholeness, and that the earth in its endless movement teaches us this truth without speaking a single word. And if we let that truth sink into us, we realize that every mountain range, every ocean trench, every desert and forest carries within it the memory of Pangea. For the Himalayas rising from the collision of India with Asia are a direct consequence of that ancient drift. The Atlantic Ocean stretching wide between Africa and the Americas is the scar of their slow parting. The icy isolation of Antarctica is the result of its long journey southward, and the distinct wildlife of Australia speaks of its solitary path across the seas. So the earth itself is like a map of history etched in stone and water, a map that shows us how unity can transform into diversity without losing its origin. For though the continents no longer touch, they still fit together in our minds, their edges proving they were once one. And this is the great lesson of Pangea, that unity does not always mean remaining attached. Sometimes unity means carrying the same essence even while apart. Just as continents drift, yet remain parts of the same world, just as rivers split from the same source yet flow to nourish distant lands, and in this, we find a reflection of the deeper truth that separation in form does not erase connection in origin, that what was once whole remains whole in meaning, even if its parts have taken different paths. And so the story of Pangea continues to live not only in science, but in the way we understand change, connection, and the journey of life itself. And so the journey of life itself becomes clearer when we study Pangea, because what at first seems like a cold tale of rocks and plates moving in silence is in reality the stage upon which all living stories have played. For without the shifting of continents, climates would not have varied so widely. Without those climates, species would not have adapted so differently. Without adaptation, there would not be the diversity of plants and animals we see today. And without that diversity, humankind itself would not have found the resources, environments, and challenges that shaped its rise. So the supercontinent was both a beginning and a teacher, showing us that unity gives strength, but change brings growth. That what looks like loss may be preparation for something greater. And when we imagine the earth in those ancient times, a single colossal land surrounded by one immense ocean, we see the foundation of all that was to come. A reminder that even the most massive forms are not eternal in their shape, that time reshapes all things, and that what remains is not the form but the purpose it served. And perhaps this is why the idea of Pangea captivates the human mind, because deep down we recognize that we too are part of a story much larger than ourselves, a story written in stone, water, wind, and time, a story that whispers to us that nothing truly drifts without meaning. And when we think of meaning, we begin to see how Pangea was more than a supercontinent. It was the canvas upon which the earliest dramas of life unfolded, a land where forests stretched unbroken across thousands of miles, where rivers wound through landscapes untouched by division, where early reptiles and primitive plants thrived together before the continents scattered them to faraway corners of the globe. And as time pressed forward and the land cracked and shifted, those same creatures found themselves in new climates, some perishing, some adapting, some giving rise to entirely new branches of life. And this cycle of loss and renewal reveals the deeper rhythm of the earth, for it shows us that nothing in creation is wasted, that even the breaking of land and the extinction of species serve as turning points leading toward greater complexity, greater richness, and greater possibilities. And so when we look back on Pangea, We are not just seeing a prehistoric curiosity, but the very roots of our present existence, because without its unity, we could not understand the beauty of its division. And without its division, we would not have the world we know today, with its countless landscapes, cultures, and stories, all of them carrying within their foundations the quiet memory of a time when everything was one. And this quiet memory lingers not only in the rocks and coastlines, but also in the hidden connections we uncover between distant lands. For when scientists compare the mountains of North America with those of Scotland and Norway, they find they were once the same chain, torn apart when the Atlantic opened. When they study the deserts of Africa and South America, they see they were once joined as one vast expanse. When they trace the mineral veins of Brazil and West Africa, they find they match like pieces of a puzzle. And even in the living world, the evidence speaks. For the marsupials of South America and Australia share a lineage from when those lands were once united. The plants of India echo the flora of Africa because they grew together before India drifted northward. So the Earth has left us clues like a trail of reminders that though the continents stand apart now, they once breathed the same air, shared the same soil, and carried the same life. And this realization deepens our understanding of connection. For it shows us that distance does not erase origin. The time may stretch and oceans may widen, but the marks of unity remain etched into the very fabric of the world. And if the Earth itself remembers its oneness, even through separation, then perhaps that is the greatest lesson of Pangea, that true unity is not undone by distance. It is preserved in the essence of all things. And as we reflect on that essence, it becomes clear that Pangea is not just a story of geology, but a mirror for the way creation unfolds. Because unity always carries within it the potential for diversity, and diversity always traces back to unity. And this cycle is written into the Earth itself. For the supercontinent was once whole, then divided, then spread into many lands, and now those lands sustain countless forms of life, cultures and histories, yet all of them remain bound to the same globe, moving together through space, nourished by the same sun, touched by the same winds, and held by the same gravity. So while the continents may appear apart, the truth is they are never separate. They are threads of one fabric stretched across time, and in this we see a reflection of the deeper order of existence, that what looks broken is not truly broken, it is transformed, that what seems distant is not truly distant, it is connected by an unseen whole. And so the story of Pangea invites us to look at the world differently, to see past the lines and borders on a map, and to recognize that all land, all water, and all life share a single origin. And in remembering this, we remember that the Earth itself teaches unity without ever speaking a word. And as the Earth teaches unity in silence, we begin to realize that every continent carries a chapter of the same ancient book. For Africa, with its rich minerals and deep-rooted history of life, Asia with its vast landscapes and towering peaks, Europe with its rolling hills and rivers that once joined distant lands, the Americas with their boundless forests and plains, Australia with its isolated wonders, and Antarctica with its frozen memory of time. All of them are pages that once belonged to a single sheet, Pangea, and though the sheet was torn by the hand of time, the story did not end. It only became more intricate, more detailed, more vibrant, until the Earth blossomed into the vast diversity we now see. And this should remind us that even what seems like a tearing apart can be the very act that makes the story richer, because the world we inhabit now is the direct result of that ancient division. So to think of Pangea is to think not of loss but of transformation, not of destruction but of creation. And in that reflection, we find that the continents drifting silently across the mantle are more than pieces of land. They are symbols of endurance, patience, and the truth that all things, no matter how scattered they seem, belong to the same whole. And when we think of that whole, it becomes impossible not to marvel at how every detail of the Earth is interconnected, because the rain that falls in South America begins its journey in the Atlantic Ocean that once touched Africa. The winds that sweep across Asia are shaped by the Himalayas that rose from India's collision after drifting away from Gondwana. The nutrients in the soil of North America were carried there by ancient glaciers formed when continents shifted into colder latitudes, and even the ice locked in Antarctica holds within it the memory of climates that existed before the land drifted to the pole. So in truth, every drop of water, every grain of soil, every gust of wind carries a story that traces back to the unity of Pangea. And though millions of years have passed since that time, its fingerprints remain in every system of the Earth, reminding us that our world is not random but purposeful, that its changes are not accidents but steps in a vast unfolding. And when we look closely enough, we realize that the same wisdom written in the drifting of continents is written in the cycles of our lives. For just as the land once broke and reshaped itself to create new possibilities, so too do we face seasons of breaking and change that prepare the ground for futures we cannot yet see. And when we lengthen our vision beyond the narrow span of years and decades and stretch it into the vast canvas of millions of years, we begin to grasp the immensity of the story of Pangea. Because what unfolded upon that supercontinent was not a moment but an age in which the Earth gathered its strength into one colossal landmass, a world where deserts stretched endlessly, where dense forests spread across continents without boundary, where rivers ran unbroken for thousands of miles, and where early reptiles, amphibians, and plants flourished together under skies untouched by the divisions that would come later. And yet even in that seeming stability, the seeds of change were already planted deep within the Earth, for the same forces that built Pangea, the shifting currents of molten rock beneath the crust, the relentless movements of tectonic plates, were also preparing for its breakup. And so the supercontinent was both a pinnacle and a prelude, a moment of unity that contained within itself the inevitability of separation. And as it slowly cracked apart over tens of millions of years, the very face of the Earth was rewritten. Coastlines redrawn, oceans born, mountains raised, climates shifted, and life itself reshaped, so that the world we live in today is nothing less than the child of that ancient transformation. And this truth expands our perspective, for it shows us that change is not an interruption of stability, but the very force that carries life forward. That unity and separation are not opposites, but stages in the same unfolding. And that even what seems permanent is in fact moving silently toward renewal. Just as the continents are still drifting today, perhaps toward a future supercontinent that will one day gather the scattered lands once more, reminding us that nothing is fixed forever, that everything moves in cycles of oneness and division, and that through it all the Earth whispers a single truth, that what appears broken may one day be whole again, and what is whole may one day break. But in both breaking and wholeness lies the hidden beauty of creation's story. And if we carry that story further, we see how the break of Pangea did not happen suddenly but slowly, almost imperceptibly, as rifts began to form in the crust and molten rock rose to the surface, creating valleys that widened into seas, seas that expanded into vast oceans, until what was once a single land became many. And in that long, patient process, new coastlines were carved, shaping the edges of continents that still bear the marks of their ancient fit, like puzzle pieces separated, but never truly forgetting their connection. And as the land drifted, climates shifted in dramatic ways. Regions once wet became dry, lush forests gave way to open plains, and areas of fertile soil were turned into deserts. Yet this constant reshaping provided new challenges and opportunities for life, forcing species to adapt, migrate, or evolve, and those pressures created resilience, variety, and innovation in the living world, which is why today the Earth is filled with so many forms of life suited perfectly to their environments, from the jungles of the Amazon to the savannas of Africa, from the icy tundra of Siberia to the coral reefs of Australia, all of which owe their existence in part to the ancient movements that began when Pangea cracked. And so the story of that supercontinent is not frozen in the past, but alive in every landscape we see today, in every ocean current that flows, in every mountain that rises, reminding us that the Earth itself is a great traveler, reshaping itself through time, carrying life along with it, and writing a story so vast that our own human history is but a brief line in its pages, yet still connected to the same forces that once drew the continents together and then sent them apart. A reminder that we too are part of this living, shifting planet whose unity and diversity are two sides of the same truth. And as we keep following that truth deeper, we realize that Pangea was not the first supercontinent, nor will it be the last, because before it there were others like Rodinia and Gondwana, and after it there will be more. For the Earth is never still but always moving through cycles of gathering and scattering, a rhythm written into its very foundations, and this rhythm teaches us that nothing in creation is truly final, that every beginning holds within it the seed of an ending, and every ending quietly prepares the ground for a new beginning. So the unity of Pangea was not an eternal state, but a stage in a much larger dance, a moment in which the earth drew itself together, only to spread out again. And in this ebb and flow, we find a reflection of the larger harmony that governs existence. Because just as the continents drift, yet remain bound to the same globe, so too are we carried along by forces greater than ourselves, unseen yet undeniable, shaping our paths, guiding our futures, and reminding us that what feels permanent may one day shift, and what feels broken may one day be joined again. And when we look at the slow drift of continents over hundreds of millions of years, we are reminded to see our own lives in a wider frame. To understand that change, however slow or painful, is not without meaning, and that the earth itself is proof that patience and time bring transformation. For even the greatest supercontinent was not fixed forever, but part of a story still unfolding. And we walking upon these scattered lands are witnesses to the continuation of that story written in stone. Water, sky, and time. And when we pause to imagine that unfolding, we begin to see how the very landscapes we know today, mountain ranges, coastlines, valleys, deserts, islands, and fertile plains, were all born from that great drifting that began with the breakup of Pangea. Because as plates pulled apart, they created the Atlantic Ocean, whose currents now regulate climates across the globe. As continents collided, they thrust up ranges like the Himalayas, the Alps, and the Rockies, towering reminders of the slow but unstoppable movement beneath our feet. As rifts widened, they formed seas like the Red Sea that still grows wider every year. And as land shifted toward the poles or the equator, climates transformed, giving rise to new ecosystems that demanded adaptation and resilience from every living thing. And in this way, the drifting of continents became the stage for the drama of life, a stage upon which evolution unfolded with endless creativity, producing the diversity we see today in plants, animals, and humans, so that even our own existence is tied to the story of Pangea. For without its unity and its breakup, the resources we depend upon, the climates that shaped us, and the paths of migration that led to human civilizations would not exist as they do. And this realization humbles us, because it shows that the ground we walk on is not merely background, but the silent architect of our history, shaping us even as it shifts beneath us, and it whispers to us a truth as vast as the earth itself, that everything changes. But nothing is wasted, that every drift, every collision, every crack in the crust is part of a purposeful order, and that in the long memory of the earth, unity and separation are simply two steps in the eternal dance of creation. And as we follow that eternal dance further, we notice that the impact of Pangea's formation and breakup extends even to the currents of the oceans, the flow of winds, and the distribution of life across the planet. For when the continents were joined, ocean currents circled the globe in ways that created extreme climates in the interior. Deserts stretched farther than they do today, and storms followed routes uninterrupted by land masses. Yet when Pangea split, the opening of new seas allowed currents to form that regulate temperatures, distribute nutrients, and sustain life on a scale impossible before. And the winds adapted to new coastlines, carrying seeds, pollen, and moisture across continents, influencing the evolution of forests, plains, and deserts, while animals and humans much later followed paths determined by these rivers, oceans, and climate patterns, and even the cycles of rainfall, drought, and glaciation can be traced back to the positions of continents over millions of years, showing that Pangea's breakup was not merely a geological event, but a profound ecological shift that prepared the world for complexity, diversity, and life's astonishing resilience. And when we realize this, we begin to see that the Earth itself is a living system, where each movement, each fracture, each collision carries consequences far beyond the immediate, and that the slow, silent shifting of continents is a teaching about patience, about interconnectedness, and about the invisible threads that link every living being to the land, the sea, and the air. And in contemplating this, we understand that Pangea is not just a chapter in the Earth's history, but a living lesson about unity, change, and the extraordinary balance that sustains all life. And as we continue to reflect on this, we see that the legacy of Pangea is also deeply written into the diversity of life itself. For when the supercontinent existed, species could migrate freely across vast stretches of land, exchanging genetic material, spreading populations, and establishing ecosystems that were once connected as a whole. But as the continents drifted apart, isolation occurred, and species were forced to adapt to new climates, new predators, new landscapes, and this isolation became the engine of evolution, giving rise to unique flora and fauna found only on certain continents, like the marsupials of Australia, the giant mammals of North America, or the lush plant life of the Amazon. And even today, the distribution of species makes sense only when we remember that they once shared common origins on a single landmass. And this demonstrates how profoundly the Earth's movements shape the course of life, guiding evolution in ways that are both subtle and immense. And in this we find a lesson that applies beyond biology, that separation and challenge are often the catalysts for growth, that being placed in a new environment or facing new trials does not signify the end, but opens possibilities for adaptation, innovation and flourishing, just as the breaking of Pangea set the stage for the incredible variety of life we see today. And so when we walk through forests, across plains, or along oceans, we are witnessing the echoes of an ancient unity, a reminder that life itself is resilient, that change carries purpose, and that even in division, the essence of connection remains intact. And as we look even closer at the Earth today, we notice that the story of Pangea continues to shape not only the natural world, but also the environments in which humans live. For the locations of fertile plains, flowing rivers, and mineral-rich mountains are all direct consequences of the movements that began with the supercontinent. And the distribution of these resources influenced migration patterns, the rise of civilizations, the development of trade, and the shaping of cultures across the globe. So the continents drifting apart set the stage for human history itself, quietly guiding where societies could thrive and where they would struggle. And even the climates we experience today, the monsoons of Asia, the dry heat of Africa, the temperate zones of Europe, the vast plains of North America, are echoes of the ancient positions and separations of continents, showing that Pangea's legacy is not locked in the past, but continues to touch every aspect of life, every choice, every journey, and every generation. And in this, the Earth becomes both teacher and storyteller, illustrating that nothing exists in isolation, that every place, every climate, every living being is part of a greater whole, and that the slow, patient drift of continents across the globe is a lesson in endurance, connection, and the hidden purpose of change, reminding us that even what seems distant or broken is part of a vast, interconnected design, and that the unity of life endures across time and space, quietly shaped by forces both immense and subtle, and that in understanding this, we gain not only knowledge of the Earth, but wisdom for living within it.